I think like I suppose like, so for me, the best thing for me to do is just like kind of think of an example from my own life. So at the moment, I live with my partner and we're not married, and we sleep together, and that in a an evangelical or a particularly a conservative church scenario would be considered like really not okay, and really like, and I know that there are people who I used to be at church with who would really not be comfortable with like knowing that, to the point where they would just not ask,
Mm.
or they might ask but then they would ask to a certain point, and then it wouldn't be like pointedly stop asking, but then they would like, oh, I better not ask anymore because I don't, if I don't know, I can't like, I don't have to correct or anything like that. Does that make sense? And yet for myself, there's still like this deeply ingrained sense um, of of shame surrounding that I kind of have to now and then just re-justify it and go, hang on a sec, where has that come from? Where does that like sense of this is wrong come from? And that's not like anything that's biblical or anything like that. It's not like anything that is that I've read. It's only a sense that I've got from being in church. I haven't come across it, I haven't read it, I haven't uh, gone seen it explicitly sort of laid out in scripture and me go, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. There's other stuff that I've got from scripture and other things that I can see as interpretations. So things like surrounding promiscuity, that seems to be a bit of an issue. Certainly things like surrounding the whole sort of being in relationship with people of different cultures back when the Jews were first arriving in the Promised Land, which I don't get, but definitely doesn't seem to relate. Do you know what I mean? There's other things about like being in a relationship that I can see in the Bible, but nothing surrounding marriage specifically. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's for me, in my own life, that's like an area where I'm aware that there's still like internalized shame, and there's still like stuff that I'm working through in my own faith and my own deconstruction, I think, of
Yeah,
faith.
I was just thinking that that's part of the feels part of the deconstruction process of like
Yeah.
which thread here could I attach to the Bible? Is coming. Which thread is just like, how did that get there?
How did I
Where did
get
that?
there? Like, it's like
Where's
just
that in all that?
constructing a piece of Lego and finding a Mega Blocks in there and going, hang on a second. I don't mean, I'm not a purist, but still.
Yeah, it is, and it is. Um, it isn't just confusing. It is. It is all the fears and the shame that is it, like those mega blocks are loaded with, and those Lego blocks are loaded with.
Yeah.
Like it's all that, isn't it? So it's, and those will, they pull us and push us all the time. Yeah, yeah. And I was just wondering why you were speaking. Like, what I was wondering if there was, what is the conversation maybe you would like with other friends?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I don't know, because there's a part of it that feels, this is like it's my own personal life. And I think that when it comes to things that surround shame, so frequently it is to do with sex. So frequently, like things like the reason that a lot of gay people will be kind of just like maybe say distrusted in church, or like there's this sort of such a tension between the LGBT movement and churches, is because because there's a sex element. It is to do with like sexual preference or sexual sort of like proclivity, or I'm trying to think of the right phrasing. It's such a minefield to like, but you get what I mean. You know, that's what it is. It's about, isn't it? It's what we're attracted to and what like sexually we're interested in, and as a result, there's like this real sort of sense of, oh, this isn't okay, because we can't talk about it, because we can't be open about it. And there's fascinating something that Nadia Bolz-Weber said was, and I think it might even be on the front cover of her book, is that she asked her partner, why does he think that the church has got such an issue with sex? And his response, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in anything, or agnostic. I might be doing him just injustice there. But either way, he's not come from a Christian background, and he said, well, it's the biggest competition, right? It's the church's biggest competition. I was like, whoa, okay, yeah. I can kind of see where he's coming from with that. That it's like a sense of, this is a real intimate part of our lives that we wouldn't share with people naturally, unless we really trusted them and really believed that they had our best interests. Whereas when we're at church, we're sharing like our spiritual selves, which is a really intimate, close part of ourselves. But then we're expected to share that with others. And yet that, I feel for me, that's got just as much, and I said this last time we spoke, there's just as much kind of reverence and sacredness that I hold with that as I would with sex. You know, that there's like, I wouldn't talk to all of everybody about what I do and how I commune with God, and equally I wouldn't talk to everybody about how I commune with Jen, with my partner. So and yet there's aspects of it that I would talk to people about, because the relationship that I have, and when we look at it relationally, it kind of makes sense. And you'd be like, well, that's sort of weird to compare those. But when you think about it like relationally, I have a relationship with God, and there's certain elements of my relationship with God that I would be super public about and super like, you know, happy to talk to anybody about. There's other aspects of my relationship with God that I just wouldn't talk to people about, because I'm like, no, that's super deep, super intimate, and super like personal. Why would I, you know, that's too precious. And it's exactly the same for me and Jen. Like there's aspects of my relationship that I want people to know about and I'd share, and other aspects that I'm like, no, that's us. That's for us. That's so personal.
I think that's really helpful framing of it, because I was thinking, well, you know, I don't want to share, you know,
exactly.
Like, there's so much, and because I want to hold how precious it is, and it really, I love that, you know, like how you like it's all about intimacy, like that's so precious, and I don't know how, I don't know how true this is, but just the thought I had was, you know, there is the locker room banter about sex, what I call it, you know, like
where we
where we really diminish it, and it becomes about performance or accomplishment, or, you know, whatever it becomes about. And I'm just thinking, you know, you mentioned about in church you should talk about spirituality, and I was just wondering, what are the shoulds of how you should talk about your own spirituality in church? And I like, does it become like locker room spirituality?
Oh,
And
that's,
like, you know, that's a bit cheeky. It's even a bit
yeah, no, but
a
there is,
bit demeaning to perhaps what people are really trying to do in churches.
yeah,
But
there
how
is,
much was I involved in that? You know, how much was I involved in sharing my performance in spirituality, or whatever it was, or my accomplishments in spirituality?
yeah.
Or
But I mean,
yeah,
you're not wrong, because that
I know. I really don't want to. I don't want to. I'm okay offending people, but I don't want to tread on what people are really earnestly trying to do.
sure.
Um,
But I mean, like, just looking at the New Testament, there's a bit where Paul talks, I think it's in Corinthians or something like that, and he talks about the gifts of the Spirit, and he says, you know, like, there's this gift and that gift and the other gift, and like this gift is better than that gift, but like, don't worry about it if you don't have it. It's like, and the whole sort of like idea of hierarchy, but also that all of the gifts are important. And I can imagine that is a rebuttal, or like in response to people like lording it over one another, or like being like, oh, look how holy I am for doing this, and that sort of locker room-esque scenario. Yeah, I can fully imagine that. And how there's stuff that you experience, and that if you, and I guess this kind of ties into what we talked about last time as well, that if you talk about it in the wrong context, or to the wrong people, at the wrong sort of time, it cheapens it, and it doesn't kind of come across, and those things are like precious and like pearls, and like, you don't want to be kind of sullying it by cheapening it, by cheapening the experience, in the same way that you don't want to cheapen your relationship by just telling all and sundry about how you live. And I think that's it, kind of like, you know, when I think a little bit about, say, kind of stuff that you might see on reality TV, where you just know absolutely everything about somebody's life, and it becomes kind of lurid and a bit almost shameful, like how much you know about this person's life, and you're just like, nobody should really be knowing this about this person's life. And if that is how they want to live, okay, you know, it's not how everybody would choose to live, but if that's how they're choosing to live, why is it being highlighted and pointed out? And it's obviously because there's an element of like, wow, this is different, or this isn't how everybody would do it, or it's not how I would do it. Whoever's like, you know, that whatever media is taking the stance or whatever. But it's kind of left up to us as the general public, or the consumer, to judge. And I think that's another element of it, is it's when we come under scrutiny and under judgment, particularly of others or each other, that's where shame is germinated. That's where it's spawned. Because when we're seen and we're not judged, there's no shame. There's nothing to be ashamed of. But when we're in danger of being judged, that's where it will come about. That's a really weird way of saying all of that, but I think it kind of landed.
Yeah, I think so. And I was just taken back to person-centered therapy, like the core conditions of non-judgmental, or unconditional, regard, no judgment, and empathy, so being understood, like, and also it's that congruence of like the person I'm talking to, say in this space, is it's like, okay, are they going to judge me? Are they going to understand me? Are they going to be real with me about, you know, they're not this holy Christian or this holy person who's got life sorted. Like, are they going to be real back with me? And I think we step into, or I think it's so easy to step into that place of maybe being non-judgmental, but being a bit more sympathetic than empathic. So kind of
Yeah.
like, oh, it's okay for you, or it's, you know, it's and which is another way of just severing
It's
me and you.
showing that there is a line, but
Yeah.
maybe it's not, you know, for me it's not so important. For other people it might be better for me. Yeah.
Or kind of like, oh, I can see that's really hard.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like there's that, I don't know, kind of, but also it's separation. Like, I'm not going to go there with you. I'm not going to.
You're not joining that person and
Yeah.
go, okay, well, let's be there together. Let's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be, I think there's that sense in churches, in my experience, in it could be any spiritual community, I guess, but you're the, like, the person who's in the circle, the tight circle, is the one that is the holier one. The and so the one that maybe there's a pressure to evangelize or witness, or pressure to rescue or save the other person, or a pressure to be in some sort of authority or something, or just the pressure to be okay, to have their life sorted and everything to be fine. And it's just so when we come to approaching real people, we've just got so many layers of walls between us and them.
And I think it's hard enough without any of those walls, you know. I think it's really hard for us to connect with people and each other, when we don't like have these additional barriers placed between us, and maybe that's like, maybe that's the separation that's the issue. It's weird. It is weird, because I can see as well, and again, just thinking about my own experience of these things, how those barriers, those walls, when I first came to faith, were so kind of instrumental in me like building super close relationship with the other people inside. And that institutional, almost artificial sense of community. Well, artificial to an extent, but like there was a real sense of like of communicating and understanding one another on a very deep level. But at the same time, to what cost did that like then cement senses of shame within me, and a sense of judgment or self-judgment in me? And I guess I don't know. I guess that is the whole purpose of deconstruction, is to kind of come out of all of that. But just make me question a bit.
Yeah, and maybe a continuing journey, like one we're stuck with forever. Or we just go round, sometimes going a bit forward, and I think I feel like we might be drawing to a close. And there was just a couple of things that I want to pick up on, is how one was this idea, like I'm just conscious there'll be things we've not talked about, taboos we've not talked about, and we talked about LGBT, and I think that's a real important taboo in churches, and in some churches sometimes, and sexuality, and just the sexuality of anybody, let alone people not considered the norm. And I think and I'm aware, okay, we've not touched on, maybe the divorced. I think you mentioned it before we were saying.
Oh, you did,
And I also think, and I'm really, as I say this, I'm really conscious in our whole conversation, like I'm conscious how I'm a heterosexual man in the circle, and fit, but Yeah, so just conscious, okay, what's the experience of minority groups in churches,
Yeah.
kind of BAME groups? Like, I think that's become more on my heart and horizons, so in the last couple of years, especially with all that is happening globally, and some that I know, some people I know, and I'm just like conscious that there's probably loads of these taboos that I'm not talking about, and there will be the real painful experience of people that are thrown down on the floor in front.
I think you're right. I think there's additionally, like, we haven't really looked at people who are struggling with various substances or addictions or anything like that, and that again can be a real barrier for people. And we might have mentioned it a bit last time, but I think this is stuff that, like, you know, we've talked briefly about it all this time, but you know, we can keep this discussion going, because I think it's rich with
and also recognizing maybe some stuff isn't ours to talk about.
There is that. Absolutely.
There is a limit to our experience.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I was just thinking that when that we, you know, it's easy for us as middle class white people, or at least like the perception of others to put us into middle class white framework. Because I think for myself, the recognition that actually, you know, I don't come from a strictly white background, and whether or not that has impacted me, and how have I adapted myself to kind of fit into that, into like my perception of a middle class white background, even subconsciously, to become more acceptable, if that makes sense. You know, that's like a whole kind of brain spiral going on there, doing the same thing. And it just sort of makes me think, you know, that you're absolutely right. Do we have it, you know, is there any right for anyone to talk about anybody else's experience? Actually, ultimately, we can only really talk from our own and what we've seen and what we've experienced, and recognize that there's elements of that which will absolutely give us a privilege, and recognizing that privilege and recognizing, and I suppose that's the expansion of it, isn't it? Is the, like, can we develop and develop self-awareness and more empathy, and less rescuing sort of like approach to be more, oh, okay, there's been some real damage here. Can we take a step back from like damaging and just purely be loving in this, and what is the most loving thing? And sometimes that is just a real, this isn't our place, let's leave it. So I think that's super positive. Really good place to leave it.
And then just pulling it back right to the start, where you mentioned the story of Jesus, where the woman was thrown in front of him. I remember reading that, and kind of in my imagination, kind of assuming, okay, the woman's on the floor, and what does Jesus do? Well, he goes to the floor and just writes something. Like, it's completely just like, I don't know, it's like not responding in that sense. But also it's like, for that woman, Jesus, like that same level, like it's just that, it's like, that's who I'm with.
That's amazing. That's a really good point, actually.
It just came up, and and also, you know, that's why I love the Christian story still, There's stories like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Having said that, there's a load of argument whether it should be in scripture at all.
Well, exactly.
But,
met with a little caveat when you read
yeah.
it. This isn't in most Bibles.
Yeah.
So what?
Why is it here? What?
I mean, it makes sense to me to be included, because when I think of Jesus, when I think of God, and I think of like people and what like infuriates me, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That's what we need to be learning about, is like not shaming one another, and not not sort of like lording it over people who we think we're better than. Yeah, it's mad. It's mad. And it does kind of get me questioning, okay, who do I think I'm better than unjustifiably? Do you know what I mean? And even justifiably, who do I think I'm better than? And actually, maybe I need to be looking at myself rather than them.
Yeah, it's, as you were speaking, I was thinking, who am I in that story?
Right, yeah.
That's a hard question.
The person,
yeah,
probably the stone.
Yeah.
Very rarely Jesus.
Yeah.
Rarely, if ever.
Yeah.
100%.
Great. Anything left for you, James?
No, that's been really solid, Tom. That's been really, really good. I think, I think it's really good to talk about these things, because it does, particularly like for myself, like just being honest and open, and just like it's kind of liberating. And I'll probably talk about it a bit more next time. Just saying that out loud, like that I live with my partner, and that being okay. It kind of like reminds me a little bit of Johari's window, and like the whole known and unknown, and the seen and unseen areas. Yeah, that was good.
That's great. Thank you very much, James. Thank you if you've joined us, and message anything, any questions you might have, anything you want us to discuss, and if you want to share your experiences, even better, where we can't go, especially, we'd love to hear that. And I hope this seems like a safe space for that. And it's okay if you don't want to do that. Great. You take care, everybody, and we'll hopefully see you next week.